All right, so as tensions are increasing between the United States and the Soviet Union, we're going to see the construction of the Berlin Wall in 1961. This was in response to millions of East Germans fleeing to West Berlin and the democratically controlled West Germany. Khrushchev has already delivered an ultimatum on Berlin under the Eisenhower administration. He's going to do the same with Kennedy. And this is mainly because the Bay of Pigs showed some U.S. weakness here. The USSR wants to strip all Western access to Berlin from the United States, and Kennedy says that we are not going to abandon West Berlin or West Germany. We are going to send some more soldiers there, but in August of 61, the Soviet Union is going to start to build a wall to separate West Berlin from the rest of Berlin and East Germany. And this literally goes up overnight. And Kennedy is going to go visit Berlin and give his famous I am a Berliner speech, Ich bin ein Berliner. And U.S. is still going to have access to West Berlin, but the wall is going to stay up pretty much until November of 1989 when it comes down. All right, now let's move on to the big thing in Kennedy's presidency and the movie we're going to start watching on Monday for Extra Credit Lunch, the Cuban Missile Crisis occurring in October of 1962. So, Khrushchev has been placing nuclear weapons in Cuba just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, starting in October of 62. The Soviets are using these weapons to force the United States into backing down on Berlin, Cuba, and any other troubled areas. This is a very famous political cartoon from the time period. Khrushchev, Kennedy, arm wrestling, sitting on hydrogen bombs, and Kennedy's finger is about to hit the trigger. Lovely. Okay. So, only the Pacific Northwest, Seattle area was out of range of Soviet missiles. It could hit any other target in the United States. So we are using our U-2 spy planes in October, taking aerial photographs, revealing that the Russians were secretly and speedily installing these nuclear missiles. Our warning system and our warning for a nuclear attack went from 30 minutes down to 2 minutes. That's extremely frightening. That's barely enough time to duck and cover. And the U.S. was caught off guard by the fact that these weapons were actually in Cuba. So we were not really prepared. And so Kennedy gets on, says any attack by Cuba on the United States or any other Latin American country would see full retaliatory response on the Soviet Union. And Kennedy is going to reject surgically bombing the missile launching sites, fearing that it is going to lead to war and no guarantee that all the missiles would be hit and destroyed. He's also going to reject a plan for the U.S. to invade Cuba again, though the cabinet and the military strongly favored this plan. He is worried it's going to go to war. Also, any Soviet nuclear tactical weapons in Cuba would have completely destroyed an invading American army, although Kennedy did not know this at the time. For about 13 days, we are going to watch on the news Soviet ships carrying more missiles towards Cuba. We finally do what's called a naval blockade around Cuba to try to prevent the Soviet ships from entering Havana Harbor. Of course, if any Soviet ship crossed our naval blockade, that would be deemed an act of war. The U.S. would have had to fire on the Soviet ship, and we literally would have been in World War III. So this showed great response for Kennedy and Khrushchev. They had to do back channel negotiations because the U.S. president could not be seen negotiating directly with the Soviet Union, but both didn't want this to go to full nuclear annihilation. So, October 26th, Khrushchev is going to agree to remove the missiles if the U.S. removes missiles from Turkey and vows not to attack Cuba. Of course, the U.S. does not want to appear weak, so we agree to remove the missiles in Turkey at a much later date, 6 months to a year later, and play it off that they're in no way connected to this Cuban Missile Crisis. In July of 1963, we're going to sign a nuclear test ban treaty banning the atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons over land, sea, and outer space. Khrushchev refuses a condition of the treaty, which is on-site inspections. It's not designed to reduce nuclear stockpiles and is signed by all major powers except France and China. JFK considers this treaty to be his greatest achievement as president. Also, we have what's known as the hotline, the telephone line installed with 24-hour access between Moscow and Washington. However, during running through the election, Kennedy's re-election on November 22nd, 1963, John F. Kennedy is going to be assassinated in Dallas, Texas, while on a trip to drum up support, and he is pronounced dead at 1 p.m. Governor Wall Connolly was also shot at the same time. It's called the magic bullet theory, which states that one single bullet went through Kennedy's back, out his neck, and then hit Governor Connolly. But it is actually true that there was one bullet that caused severe damage to Kennedy and Connolly at the same time. Now, the person who was allegedly the assassin for Kennedy, which he was never put on trial, so we never will know, was Lee Harvey Oswald, who was supposed to have ties back to Moscow. And the Warren Commission, which is going to be started by now President Johnson, is going to state that Oswald was the lone gunman. Now, this is probably the biggest conspiracy theory in all of American history. Who really killed JFK? Why was JFK killed? How many gunmen were there? How many bullets were there? Why is there the magic bullet theory? And there is a fascinating documentary on this that you can Google and watch. So the Warren Commission's job was to figure out what happened with Kennedy. And basically, it just said that Oswald was the lone gunman, but we'll never know because Oswald was killed a few days later by a gentleman named Jack Ruby, who was associated with the mafia. There's also conspiracy theories that Kennedy was killed by the mafia. So who knows? As you can see here, this is President Lyndon B. Johnson being sworn in on Air Force One with Mrs. Kennedy, whose husband's body is in the cargo of the plane being flown back to Washington, D.C. Johnson apparently was very insistent that Jackie Kennedy be in this photo and be by his side as he takes the oath of office to show continuity in government. Okay, so President Lyndon B. Johnson is going to run for his full first term in office with the election of 1964. He is going to pledge to continue Kennedy's policies when he becomes president. He is going to get the civil rights bill through Congress as well as tax cuts. Johnson is one of the very, very few Southern Democrats to actually favor civil rights. He begins his war on poverty, pushing bills through Congress costing billions of dollars. And the 1964 tax cut of about $10 billion does result in an economic boom. Johnson is going to call this his Great Society. Sweeping set of New Deal type economic and welfare measurements aimed to transform America. And this was partly because of Michael Harrington's book, The Other America, published in 1962, which showed that 20% of the U.S. population and over 40% of blacks lived in poverty. Now, interesting to note that actually President Johnson was from Texas, and he actually grew up in poverty. He was not a rich, well-educated child. He eventually goes to school, makes lots of money in the oil business, but he grew up very poor. So this issue with poverty strikes a chord with him, and that's why it's called the Great Society. His Republicans are going to nominate Barry Goldwater. He has been in the news lately because he kind of shakes up the Republican Party at the time. And we're kind of experiencing that now. He is a senator from the state of Arizona. He does not like federal income tax. He does not like the Social Security system. He does not like civil rights. He does not like the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. And he is certainly not in favor of the Great Society. He is the father that many deem to be of modern conservatism. So if there's an essay on the rise of conservatism during this time period, Barry Goldwater is the person that you should mention. Reagan's platform when he runs for president in 1980 is going to be very, very similar to Goldwater's platform in 1964. Okay, Goldwater does, interesting enough, Goldwater disenchants many of his fellow Republicans with his extremism. So much synthesis to get there with our current election. All right, suggests that U.S. field commanders should be given discretionary authority to use nuclear weapons at their disposal. Many Republicans at this time are way more moderate than Goldwater. Goldwater is characterized as a warmonger who is ready to start nuclear war at any time. Johnson is going to defeat Goldwater in the Electoral College 486 to 52, or about 43 million votes to 27 million votes. Democrats are going to take both houses of Congress as well. So basically, Johnson's going to get a lot done in office because when you have a Democratic Congress and a Democratic president and you have the majority, you can get anything done in government. Okay, so Johnson's Great Society. Here's a couple of pictures of him talking to people in poverty and giving his State of the Union speech in which he's going to outline his plans. So, the Great Society, War on Poverty, in the Office of Economic Opportunity or the Equal Opportunity Act. We are going to give about $2 billion to make sure that people are being hired equally. We're going to give money to redevelop the Appalachian region, which is about West Virginia, part of the country. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 is going to increase elementary and secondary education. We also come with the Head Start program. So Head Start is still around today. It's a program where 3- and 4-year-olds can kind of go to school early. The states pay for it, and they're designed for children who are economically disadvantaged to get a head start in school, because when you're economically disadvantaged, your reading, writing, and math tend to be way below grade level or way before age appropriateness when you enter kindergarten. So Head Start was a way for Johnson to kind of give those economically disadvantaged children a leg up. The Medicare Act of 1965 is going to be passed for elderly. For the elderly, this is going to support millions of Americans who are forced into poverty because of skyrocketing medical costs. So Medicare is designed to be governmental supplements for health care for older people, and now today for people who are unable to work. The Department of Housing and Urban Development is created in 1966 to provide low-cost housing for urban renewal and also to help African Americans get housing. In 1966, Robert Weaver, the HUD Secretary, is going to become the first African American cabinet member in U.S. history. We've also got the Immigration Act of 1965, which I touched on a little bit earlier. The national origins quota system for the 1920s goes away. Immigration now based on a first-come, first-served basis, and immigrants with families already residing in the United States gets first dibs, and also builds in the thing we call political asylum. Artists, scientists, and political refugees are also given preference, and it doubles the number of immigrants coming in each year, again, mostly from Asia and Latin America. All right, we also have the National Endowment for the Arts, which creates PBS, the Public Broadcasting System. If you've ever watched Sesame Street, that is a PBS show. The space race is going to continue. We have the Water Quality Act of 1965, so we can set clean water standards. This is going to be the precursor to the Environmental Protection Agency that we're going to start in about 10 years.